easy to look at The Lord of the Rings and talk about what makes Peter Jackson a great director. It's harder to see him clearly through the fog of that achievement. Those films were such a cultural event, and at least for a while collapsed Jackson's identity into a single idea: the steward of a franchise. But that's also how he loses the forest for the trees. If you really want to understand Peter Jackson, his impulses, his obsessions, his identity as a filmmaker, and the post-Lord of the Rings career that could have been, you look at King Kong. The impossible task. The original King Kong from 1933 wasn't just a movie. It became a cornerstone of cinema, a technical marvel, a romantic tragedy, a Depression-era spectacle. By the time Jackson remade it in 2005, it had already been remade, parodied, reinterpreted, and mythologized for 70 years. So the goal? Well, make it faithful but not redundant, modern but not soulless, emotional but not overly indulgent, spectacular but not excessive. In other words, there was no right answer. There was no winning configuration, as there seldom is in a remake. But here's the thing. I don't think Peter Jackson was ever trying to win that game in the first place. As a matter of fact, I don't think he was ever playing the same game as everyone else at all. And that's what makes King Kong worth talking about. Different from The Lord of the Rings, and certainly different from The Hobbit, which I'll touch on later, King Kong wasn't just a studio assignment. It was a lifelong fixation. The 1933 Kong is not only the movie that inspired Peter Jackson to make movies in the first place, it made him want to make effects movies. At 12 years old, Jackson was already building Kong puppets and miniature sets in his garage. And so when Universal first approached him in the mid-90s, while still on set for The Frighteners, this wasn't just another job, it was the dream.
Is this the moving picture ship?
Now, I'll get into why that original 90s version of Jackson's King Kong never got made in a little bit, but this is where we get into the paradox of expectation.
Thank you. Let's take it. Would you please?
A lot of the critical discourse around this movie breaks down into the same couple of positions. Well, it's too long. Well, some of the visual effects are poor. Oh, it's too sentimental. And it's fine. If you don't like a movie, you don't need a reason. But statements like these aren't so much reactions to what we see, they're reactions to what we expect to see. From a Hollywood blockbuster, from a remake, from a Peter Jackson movie, and expectation is tremendously powerful. If you wanted a tight monster movie, then the 187-minute runtime feels bloated. If you wanted a reverent remake, the expansions feel indulgent. If you wanted a radical reinvention, the devotion to 1933 feels perhaps a bit conservative. If you wanted tonal consistency, then the movie's genre hybridity, screwball comedy, horror, romance, tragedy, maybe lacks coherency.
What do you think? Driscoll dialogue's got some flow now, huh?
That was pure effluence.
Peter Jackson made a movie that lives between categories. It wasn't a compromise, it was a collision. It dared to be long, emotional, reverent, indulgent, technologically experimental. It strove to be both a love letter to cinema's past and a blueprint for what was possible. And that combination was never going to land elegantly.
You won't like it. It's not alcoholic.
Preston, you have a lot to learn about the motion picture business.
But Jackson didn't care. To him, King Kong was an effects movie. For a 12-year-old boy in his garage, the ultimate effects movie. An homage to his heroes, pioneers into the form like Willis O'Brien and Ray Harryhausen. And like the 1933 King Kong original, it was designed to put you in awe of what filmmaking was physically capable of in a moment in time. So, does the CGI hold up beautifully? Does it not? Well, bear in mind, this movie came out over 20 years ago. You know what CG insertion looked like 20 years before that? Okay, actually, that's pretty fucking cool. But my point is, Kong set the benchmark in 2005. The interactivity between King Kong and his surroundings, especially between Andy Serkis's mocap and Naomi Watts' Ann Darrow, is phenomenal. What I believe lacks polish is A, the use of digital doubles, which, by the way, were absolutely no better on Lord of the Rings, and B, the film's digital compositing.
I've been doing a lot of Stairmaster, but what I should have been doing was a treadmill. If I was running away from dinosaurs running upstairs, I could do it all day.
Okay, and forget the dinosaur stampede for a second. Consider the complexity of even a low action sequence like this one. That's two separate gimbal shot rowboats composited together onto a digital ocean. In 2005, the ambition of King Kong simply outpaced the tools.
I'll make it worth your while.
And it wasn't shy about it either. These aren't typical early effect shots masked by quick cuts and obscured lighting or constant visual apologizing. Shots are long, broad daylight, rain, chaos. There are as many visual effects shots in King Kong as there are in all three Lord of the Rings films combined. It's Kong against not one but three T-Rexes, it's danger behind every bush, it's showing off elaborate exotic playgrounds, fantastical sets built to such romantic proportions. It's a movie that doesn't rush towards plot checkpoints, but instead pursues pure adventure. It's a romance between eras of filmmaking. Old Hollywood sincerity colliding with digital modernity, like the 1933 original, like the Lumiere's Arrival of a Train in 1896. King Kong is first and foremost about the novelty of watching something astonishing unfold before our eyes. But viewing King Kong today at home, especially in 4K HDR, on disc, on a UB820, on a Sony A95L, you notice something else that doesn't make the rounds enough. 1930s New York. Now, depending on what you're viewing this on, you may not be able to fully appreciate it, but the recreation of Manhattan in HDR is truly unlike anything I've ever seen. Not only the sets, but the faces, the costumes, the lighting, the film stock, the references to historic newsreels. It looks less like a modern recreation and more like an impeccable colorization of actual archival footage. You can draw a straight line from this to Jackson's documentary They Shall Not Grow Old from 2018. His obsession with historical texture, making the past feel present, finds one of its earliest, boldest expressions right here in this movie. A set built from scratch in New Zealand because no LA backlot was big enough. Shops, streets, cars, inspired by real photographs from the era. A tactile environment, texture for the actors, for the camera, and then simply extended digitally. And that's just it. For all its talk of digital effects, what doesn't get celebrated enough is just how much of this movie is real. Back then, nothing was a given. It only mattered what the best solution to a problem was. And when they could, Jackson and Weta, they chose to build, to manufacture a world of fantasy from scratch. It reminds me of that gag in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where they're constructing Earth 2.0. Every tree, every pond, every cliff, it's the marriage between the digital and the physical that is Jackson's signature genius as a filmmaker, when he's impassioned by a project. The same matrimony of digital expansion and grounded reality that made The Lord of the Rings legendary. As I alluded to earlier, King Kong was almost made to be released in 1998. Before Weta Workshop had cut their teeth on Middle-earth, and in so many ways, the Kong we ended up getting only worked at all because The Lord of the Rings and all of its advancements preceded it. Technology leapfrogged so dramatically pre and post Lord of the Rings that, for example, what was originally planned as hero shots of New York City in the 98 version of Kong got demoted to previs for the 05 version. Now, that said, we can actually sort of postulate what Jackson's 1998 King Kong might have looked like if we look at other movies from that year, because as it happens, in 98 we got both a giant ape movie in the form of Mighty Joe Young, which used a combination of suits and ILM animatronics to achieve a 15-foot gorilla, and a remake of Godzilla, with its blend of CG and practical effects. Both films embraced the technology of their day, but these were still juvenile years for digital, and that's also the weird fork in the road here. It's actually because of Mighty Joe Young and Godzilla that Universal pulled the plug on Kong back in '97 after already spending a year on pre-production following The Frighteners, not wanting to compete with similar movies. And it's because they pulled the plug that Peter Jackson was given the opportunity to begin work on The Lord of the Rings that very same year. Middle-earth as we know it would not exist if it weren't for each of these films. But okay, Lord of the Rings, King Kong. So then why was this Jackson's last great adventure movie? We all know by now that the Hobbit trilogy was not his passion. He was roped into it with virtually no pre-production, an absolute detriment to the use of practical effects, after other folks chose to abandon the project. It was a complete mess, and the literal only other narrative film Jackson directed since Kong was The Lovely Bones. Drastically different. Well, a change in personal creative interests was certainly one thing, but the other was the loss that came in 2015, when Jackson's longtime collaborator, cinematographer Andrew Lesnie, died, and Jackson became reluctant to work on conventional scripted features again without him.
Nervous?
And that's a tragedy.
Nervous? No.
Because I really do think King Kong, perfect or imperfect, gave us a unique glimpse into a career that could have been. Just as The Lord of the Rings was a perfect storm, I think the events that followed Kong, from the rocky execution of The Hobbit to the death of Lesnie, was also just as much a perfect storm of misfortune. And that's why this movie sits on my shelf. It's a very special piece of history. My friend asked me the other day, but did it need to be that long? And I immediately said, yes. This movie wasn't for us now, today. It was for an audience 20 years ago who went to the theater to witness wonder. It was for Jackson and the ragtag team at Weta who conceived it from childhood fantasies. It was for the technology and the industry at large to grow, for dream fulfillment and movie making for the sake of movie making. And it deserved to be indulgent, from start to finish. I'm Danny Boyd. This is CinemaStix. Thank you so much for watching.
Easy. Easy part cheesy.
Hot points.
How about when you're running away from f***ing dinosaurs? Oh man, that's gonna be a bitch.